Hello and welcome everyone. If you are new here, this is Brew Digital Hack Series hosted by yours truly. My name is Debbie. I'm the Senior Social Media Manager here at Brew. And today we have another exciting topic for you all. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about web development, AI insights, and just the latest technology out there. So, if you are a business owner, a developer, or just interested in the latest tech trends, you are at the right place. So, can you please join me as I introduce you our guest for today? Danica, are you in the call?
I am. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Danica Walpole. I'm a senior full stack developer here at Brew Digital.
Awesome. So Danica is one of our developers here, and I'm super excited that she's here to join us. We have really good questions for you, Danica, so I hope you came prepared.
I
Uh,
tried.
I know you aced it. Anyway, well, as I mentioned, we have a lot of things prepared for you all. We'll be covering everything from building high performance websites to the impact of AI on development. So let's just get started. Danica, I am in social media, as you know, like the world of web development for me is just a blur. Like for me, it just sounds like a very challenging task. I would like to ask you, what are your, top three tips in building scalable and high performing web applications?
I'd say my top three tips for building scalable and highly performant web applications. It starts right at the beginning because as much as you work in social media, you know how a good website or a good web app feels. So it starts with optimizing early. Think of things like performance and things like your database queries that you're using, or whether you're implementing lazy loading or caching. The sooner you get that done, the better, because those problems are only going to grow with the more traffic you get to your site. I'd say my second tip would then be to build your architecture modularly. So think about your web app as puzzle pieces. Instead of building everything as a complete picture, build it as puzzle pieces that can be improved and worked on over time. And then I'd say my third tip would be to automate and monitor. As the architecture grows, there are inevitably going to be errors and little bugs that creep up. But if you use things like CI/CD pipelines, so things that are continuously being put out onto the site to improve them and are integrated, you'll know pretty quickly if something's going wrong. That also could be things like Sentry, which is really good for error tracking. So if you implement that from the start, you'll have a really highly performant and scalable architecture.
Amazing. I hope that everyone who's listening to us is jotting those top three tips down. I'm actually quite curious, Danica, to hear from you in terms of like among those top three tips, like which one do you feel like people most often, just pass by or glaze over or do not really put a lot of emphasis on in their building?
In my personal opinion, I'd probably say the optimizing for performance early. I think that is something that can be forgotten and left to the end when there's a problem or a client or consumer reports that, hey, the site or the web app is really slow. If you think about it at the beginning, you don't sort of have to have that red faced moment. So think early, get started early in terms of database queries being top notch and really efficient. And yeah, avoid that.
Amazing. Just for our listeners as well, we are constantly also checking up our social channels and our engagement. So if you have questions for Danica, feel free to drop it on the comment, whether it is during this call or if you're watching later on. We'll make sure to pass by it and like answer your questions. So going back to this, Danica, and I'm sure this is a term or an application or a tool that everyone knows, WordPress. And WordPress actually runs over 40% of the web. That's a very interesting, stat for me. Do you think it's still the best option for businesses, or are there better choices out there today that people should start considering?
Debbie, you're asking me a big question here. And I think it's such a big question because it's a hot topic at the moment.
Mhm.
Question of whether WordPress is still the best choice for businesses or are there better alternatives really depends on the project you're working on. I think the reason why people have used WordPress for so long is because it's heavily customizable with the themes and the plugins that it offers. But then where it falls short is that it can't always be scaled quite easily for high traffic
Mhm.
sites, for example. And then you also, if you're adding in a lot of plugins to your site, like so those are third party additions that you can add to WordPress, you're then also having to think about the security vulnerabilities of each of those plugins. And so
Mhm.
that's where it's a bit tricky. In terms of whether it still works for some clients, I think yes, it does. I think if you've got a smaller scale site, it's a really great sort of entry point into having your own website and web app that you can interact with and change quite easily. But for a project that is going to grow over time, there are heaps of alternatives out there. For example, at Brew, we use Sanity with Next.js.
Mhm.
Sanity is a CMS, which is a similar thing to how WordPress can be used. And that sort of gives you a headless experience. So instead of it looking and feeling like a Sanity site, you have all the guts of the content and how you want to manage that sitting behind a framework called Next.js, which works with React. And with that, you can build something really customized, but have a sort of content backend that is straightforward and easy to use. That's for performance and like modern development sites. But then let's say you've got a shop. I'd say something like Shopify or Medusa.js is another one, could be used
Mhm.
as a headless e-commerce alternative. So when I say headless, I just mean that you're not really restricted into what it looks like.
I'm so glad you clarified it, because I was like, headless? Okay.
That's the thing. Yeah, it's a bit like headless, boneless. What, like, what is she on about? And it's, yeah, it's remembering to clarify those phrases. And then for SaaS and apps, and so by SaaS, I mean software as a service,
Mhm.
you can have more custom built stuff. So you're then talking like your React and Vue apps with something like Firebase or Superbase behind it. And so basically, when it comes to the question of is WordPress the best choice, it really just depends on the kind of site you're building and what you're working with.
Amazing insights right there, Danica. And I love that you have, really given us, concrete examples and concrete situations of like which ones to choose depending on like what your what's your end goal, what's your business about, and so on. So we'll definitely put that on our resource hub. If anyone here is checking our website, we have a resource hub with tons of articles and templates. We'll make sure to develop a guide on how to best choose, the right web tool for you. And as we have Danica here, we'll definitely go back to her insights as we make those. Um, I guess one thing, Danica, and no one can escape it. I tried, and a lot of like the the recent webinar that we did, we tried to escape it, but we really cannot, which is AI. So AI is shaking up things in development with tools like GitHub Copilot. But how do you see the role of full stack developers evolving?
I would say when we think about AI and the role of full stack developers evolving, is that I feel like AI is a really great opportunity to be able to work with artificial intelligence because you're then taking things that traditionally we would do bit by bit, incrementally, and speeding that process up. So, from my opinion, I feel like AI is a really great opportunity to boost productivity. It automates repetitive coding tasks, or even things like where you're maybe having to map over certain data points and sort of perform the same task over and over again. AI does that for you. I also feel like with that, AI can help us shift our focus. Instead of thinking about, oh, how can I make this task as efficient as possible? I can spend more time on the architecture or debugging or optimization rather than just the bare bones of the code, which is something that AI can do really quickly. The only thing I would say with AI as a full stack developer that also feels AI is going to take our jobs is that you can also go into the other camp of being overly reliant on AI. Because at the end of the day, I think the sweet spot is working together with it instead of
Hmm.
being overly reliant on, oh, it's provided this solution and just taking that and running with it. Inspect what it's saying, because sometimes it can come up with some crazy stuff, and that's because it's artificial intelligence that's always learning from what we put into it. So don't rely on it, and also be very careful with how you use it, because there are always things like security vulnerabilities. So you never want to put any sort of highly sensitive data or content into, let's say, ChatGPT or Bard or something like that, or more known as Gemini now. So yeah, the challenges are that you can rely on it too much, and you can have a whole bunch of security issues with that. It's a great opportunity for us to be able to shift our focus and figure out some more complex solutions. And I think it can boost our productivity if used in the right way.
Amazing. So I think the biggest takeaway there, and I think this is not only for full stack developers, it's for everyone. Like in my line of work, I love working with social media and using AI as a tool to boost my productivity. And I think that's a keyword there, Danica, that you used, which is working with AI, and really utilizing the best of its capabilities. But I do have to say that please do check what ChatGPT is telling you, because sometimes it goes a little bit like, the things that I get from it. I'm just like, interesting one, AI, but let me just like, work a little bit more on my prompts and like refine this a little bit more and so on. So hopefully it doesn't take out our jobs. We both need those. Danica. um, so yeah, I think like moving on from AI, and again, I think we touched on a little bit in our first question about common mistakes and all of these things. In your opinion, what is a common mistake that developers make when working on full stack projects, and what is your advice on how they can avoid them?
I think one of the most common mistakes that full stack developers can make is initially front end pitfalls. And by that, I mean putting a lot of logic on the client side. And if I break that down a bit more, have you ever experienced going onto a website and it loads really slowly? When that's happening, there's a whole bunch of functions and checks that are happening in the background, but they're happening on the browser side. And so what that means is that the user who, unbeknownst to them, has just come onto this website is having a really poor experience. And that's because a lot of the logic around, oh, what does the user want to do this? What do they mean by this click? Or how are we going to interpret that login from this bit of traffic? All of that is trying to happen really quickly, and that makes it really sluggish for the user. So let's try and move some of that to the back end, to sort of server side. So with those sorts of queries and questions around the user's behavior, we can do that on the server so that it's more predictive of these behaviors that we're seeing users sort of repeated patterns that are happening. That means that we can serve up content to them really fast based on how we know people interact with the site. I then say a second mistake that developers make with full stack projects would be the back end pitfalls. And by back end, I mean more sorts of the logic and how the site comes together. For example, a really common one is using the wrong database for the job. So you're using a SQL database when actually something called NoSQL is more suited to a database structure that is more flexible and doesn't necessarily have data in all the fields. You don't want to basically push it to fill out, if you think of it in terms of a form, fill out the entire form if actually the entire form isn't relevant to every interaction it has. So with that, it can slow down once again the project, the web app that you're building, and just make it a really yucky project to work on. I would then say the third mistake would probably be trying to run before you walk. Just start simple. Just start with something, as I said earlier, in terms of having those puzzle pieces. Build on each puzzle piece to then make something greater. Don't try and make the whole finished project straight away. You can always add more. And also, once you've done that, investigate what you've built. Use things like performance profiling tools like Lighthouse and go from there and make improvements as you go.
Okay, amazing. There you have it. And we are, on time for our last question. Danica, thank you so much for making this time for us. One thing that I love about having Danica this month is that, we have just celebrated International Women's Day. And we are still at, Women's History Month. I love that, Danica is at a position we're in. We barely have women developers. And I think you are in such a great position of impact. I've heard that you've mentored over 90 entrepreneurial students. What's the best advice you give to aspiring developers out there?
Oh, that is a good question. I'd say the best advice I could give to aspiring developers out there is sort of threefold. I would say there are a lot of tutorials online, and that is great. I feel like we're in a day and age where it's really easy to go on YouTube and learn something. But don't just follow tutorials. Think about solving problems from real life examples. There might be something that you use on a social media platform or a website, and you just wish, oh, I wish it worked like this instead. Try and build that. Try and solve your own problems so that when you're creating something, first of all, you're really interested in it. And second of all, you're actually finding and fixing a gap in the market. I think that then follows in quite nicely to mastering problem solving and not just the frameworks or the technologies that happen. Because I think one of the great things about web development in general is that you're constantly learning. But if you become a master of one framework, by the time the next framework comes out, it might not work in the same way. So if you really build on that foundation of solving problems, that's something that you can apply to loads of technologies. And then the last thing I would just say is a bit of a soft skill. Chat to people, network, contribute to open source projects, because we all have so much to learn from each other. I've been in web development for a number of years now, but you never know which conversation is going to spark that bit of intrigue or interest in yourself or someone else. And so people are a great resource. And so don't tunnel away. Don't be a gremlin behind a computer. Put yourself out there. Talk to people. It's beneficial.
Amazing, amazing. I love that. And I think that's a great way to end this Brew Digital Hack series. The purpose of this is really to sit down with our team, really learn from them in a very quick and digestible way. And Danica has really done that. I feel like I could talk to you more, Danica, about a billion things, and I'm sure our audience here have a lot of questions for you. But I just want to thank you again for being here. And please do stay tuned for our next one coming up at the end of this month. We'll be talking a lot with a colleague of mine about, of course, Facebook and primarily how to really use the tool as a platform to run your business and your ads. So again, thank you, Danica, and thank you, everyone. See you in the next episode.
Bye.